Hi, I'm Dee Dee Goldberg from Spirit Horse Equine Rescue. Welcome to our first episode of our podcast. If you stick with me throughout this episode, you'll find out how it came to be. I'm beginning to learn that sometimes after a traumatic event, you need to give yourself some time to see if there are lessons to be learned or if something good can come out of it. I've always been an action person. Jump in, push through, make it happen. But this time I couldn't. I think I know why now. Gutted. That's the best word I can find to describe how I've been feeling since last Wednesday, January 21st. This is the first time I can even consider talking about this situation, and it's going to be rough. But I do feel I owe it to you, friends, to explain why I've been offline for so long. This will be long, but I feel I need to get it all out so I can begin to heal. One thing you should know about me is that I connect events that might seem completely unrelated. But for some reason, a traumatic event often brings to the forefront another traumatic event. And I need to acknowledge that. Let me start by saying it was already a challenging day. We had yet another appointment with a Veterans Administration doctor regarding my husband Jeff's case for compensation due to the life-threatening health issues. There are many. He's had as a result of his service in the Air Force during the Vietnam War. But that's a story for another time. We arrived home about 3:30. We've been in the midst of a dangerous weather pattern. I've already posted about the biggest concern with the fluctuating temperatures and life-threatening wind chills is that horses tend not to drink properly. We watch diligently for signs of colic to try and catch it early, as I was able to do with Jamie Blue and before that, Holy Week. As I was getting ready to go out for chores, I looked out the window and saw my own horse, Lucky, down in his paddock, clearly in severe pain. He was covered in snow and ice from rolling for what must have been some time. We'd left at 12:30, and he seemed fine at that time. Lucky was arching his neck up in a way that indicates tremendous agony. He also stretched his hind legs out stiffly behind him, almost as if he'd had a seizure. I knew in that moment that he was dying. I just wanted to be able to end his suffering as quickly as possible. I don't even own a gun and have never even fired one, but I truly believe that if I had had the option, I would have been able to do what I could never imagine I would. I called the vet, left an urgent voicemail, and rushed outside. Thoughts of life with Lucky filled my brain. He was the very first horse I'd ever had from birth, 30 years ago. He was born at my friend Jeannie's farm on April 15th of 1996, where my horses lived until we built our farm and were able to move them here in 1997. While I dashed to the barn, I called Jeannie to tell her the unfortunate circumstances. She was so sad, as she'd been present at his birth. She'd called me in the middle of the night when she heard his mom, Mary's, water break over the baby monitor she'd installed in the barn. Keep in mind this was 1996, and we didn't have Wi-Fi then, so no cameras. I rushed the 20 minutes to her place, but just missed the birth. We were both thrilled that he was going to be a buckskin, which just happened to be both Jeannie's and my favorite color. We knew it was a possibility, given his mom was black and his dad is a Palomino. But there were other possible outcomes. If the foal was a colt, I had planned to name him Mr. Dillon, after the main character in Gunsmoke, the Western TV show I loved growing up. I'd named the filly Mary had at her side when I bought her Miss Kitty, so I was going to continue with that theme. But as I was driving to Jeannie's in the middle of the night, I saw a shooting star. So I decided to name him Lucky's, that's a family nickname, Shooting Star. I was able to use Dr. Robert Millard's methods and imprint him. Jeannie was so supportive, and as she'd also been down this path with her own horses, it was really comforting to speak with her. There are 5 other horses in the same large paddock as Lucky. I call it the geriatric herd because everyone is elderly and has special feed needs. I opened the back gate to call Red and Macy in to their stalls for their evening meal, and I could go examine Lucky. To my tremendous surprise, when Lucky heard me call them, he actually got up and came walking toward the barn. His belly was distended, and I feared something had ruptured in his digestive tract. I can only imagine that he was looking to me for help. He wanted to come in the barn, which he never does, but I honored his wishes and put him in the stall across the aisle from Red. Lucky immediately began pawing in pain and rolling. Just then the vet called. I told Chris what was going on. She wondered if I had any Banamine I could give him for the pain. I honestly responded that it would not be safe for me to get that close to try and administer oral medications. She understood. She and her husband and fellow vet Rennie set out immediately. Their ETA was 30 minutes. Other than the time we had to rush to the University of Wisconsin-Madison Hospital when our son had been med-flighted there after a car crash. Another story for another day. It was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Lucky crashed around in the stall, slamming his entire body into the wall, sideways and backward. He slammed into the inner stall door so hard it bent the tracks that held the heavy, solid wood door, and the door came off. Jeff and I worked quickly to drag it out of the way so Lucky didn't injure himself on the metal track or the door hardware. By now, Lucky had gone over and was violently pounding on the Dutch door that led out to the south paddock, which is inhabited by Vera and Trigger. I wanted to get them out of there so I could let Lucky out before he reduced that door to another dangerous obstacle. But the gate to the paddock was frozen to the ground. Lucky persisted in his pounding on the door. I decided to let him out and try to get the other 2 out another way. Lucky plunged out and took a few steps away from the barn. I shut the door so he couldn't get back in, as he would have been able to get into the barn aisle with the inside door gone. That was fraught with potential danger. A metal overhead door to outside and 2 metal gates dividing up the aisle. He turned around and began pawing at that door from the outside. His eyes were staring wildly in pain. He seemed completely out of touch. I hurried to get Vera and Trigger out of their paddock. They were surprisingly calm. I was able to lead them through the other Dutch door on that side of the barn. That stall is used as a feed room, so it was a bit tricky, but I was able to get them secured in other stalls. At last, I saw the vet's truck coming down the driveway. Just then, I heard a crash out where Lucky was. He had fallen backward into a sitting position, landing on the heated 16-gallon water bucket, and he was propped against the barn wall. The vets took one look at him, and we quickly agreed he needed to be put out of his pain. As they gathered what they needed, I heard another crash. Lucky had fallen to the ground onto his right side. I told Chris I thought he was dead, but she looked and said, "He's close." I then observed that he was still breathing, but his eye was staring somewhere else. It didn't take long for the drugs to help him cross over. Relief flooded through me. The vets had another emergency call, so after Chris and I hugged and Rennie told me Lucky sure was a pretty color. He is a man of few words, and I appreciated them. They drove off to help some other poor horse. It had started snowing in earnest, and darkness was falling, so I urged them to travel safely. Now what? Fortunately, Jeff had stepped into overdrive and was feeding everyone else, including going over to the farm we use across the road. I was struck with how incredibly quiet it was. Even with some horses, like our Mustang herd, waiting to be fed, none of them made a sound. Garnet and Cinnabar, the Mustangs, always whinny while they are waiting their hay. Not that night. With the darkness and the snow, I didn't want to ask Luther, our livestock removal person, to risk anything by coming to pick Lucky's body up. As awful as it sounds, it didn't matter to Lucky. His body would still be there in the morning. I got Vera and Trigger set up in the barn for the night, a heated water bucket, hay, and chaff hay. They had access to the south and north stalls and the aisleway. Vera immediately went to the Dutch door and looked out into her paddock. She saw Lucky's body. Her head flew up, she snorted loudly, and she whirled around to head across the aisle as far away as she could get. I turned on the fencer and turned out the barn lights. I called the chickens who'd been in the barn, and they followed me to their coop. I shut them in for the night and went inside. I called Luther, and he was his usual compassionate self, which is wonderful in these moments. He said he'd have a trailer up here in the morning. The rest of the evening is a blur. I ate an English muffin and stared at something on TV, recalling Lucky's life journey. Once my 5 horses, my riding horse Rose, Mary, Mary's 2-year-old daughter Miss Kitty, Lucky, and the 4-year-old gelding Red, who I'd purchased for our son. Once they were at our farm in 1997, I was able to wean Lucky with Red as his herd mate. That allowed the 2 girls to stay together. Red was the perfect uncle for Lucky, and they became bonded for life. Red was easygoing, and Lucky was feisty. Red played with him, but did teach Lucky some proper horse manners. I used the natural horsemanship methods I was studying with Lucky, and he loved playing with me. He was smart and willing and a little bit naughty. If I wasn't careful, he tried to play a bit of the bitey game with me. He spent a fair bit of time backing up until I was able to convince him I was not his horsey play pal. He was always interested in the goings-on at the farm. Once, when Jeff was up on a ladder trying to fix something, Lucky came over and started playing with the Velcro on Jeff's boots. He was a character. When he was a bit older, we'd taken in a goat that needed rescuing. Houdini was a big, beautiful, buckskin-colored goat who weighed over 200 pounds. I'd been told that goats and horses get along, so I put him in with the herd, which had been combined after Lucky's period of weaning. Well, Lucky took after that goat and chased him right up to the barn. He looked like a prize-winning cutting horse. Unfortunately, before I could start Lucky under saddle, he developed a serious stifle problem. It would be an issue if he was ridden, but he'd be pasture sound and able to be played with online and at liberty. Over the years, we had a lot of fun doing all kinds of obstacles and challenges. He'd led a terrifically healthy life, only being sick once as a yearling. He got Potomac horse fever, even though he'd been vaccinated. And we were so worried he wouldn't pull through, but he did. I finally felt my adrenaline drop enough that I might be able to go to bed. Thursday morning, Jeff and I had to use crowbars to dig the gate out of the ice so Lucky's body could be loaded onto the trailer Luther would send. I took some time to cut some of Lucky's tail hair so I could have it for some jewelry or a piece of horsehair pottery made in the future. I couldn't get any of his mane hair as he'd fallen on that side and his body was now frozen to the ground. When the young man arrived, I explained to him that had happened and that I was not able to stay and watch him load Lucky. I'd done that once many years ago, and it was so emotionally difficult, I determined never to do that again. The kind fellow said he totally understood and offered to try and cut some mane hair once he had access to it. We agreed as to where he would put the hair if he was able to cut some. I said my last goodbye to Lucky and retreated to the house. From these loft windows, my view of the actual loading would be blocked by the trailer, so I could look out and watch the other horses' reactions. Lucky's herd retreated to the far corner of their paddock and gathered in a tight group to intently watch as his body was pulled into the trailer. Feldspar and Wyatt, the two Mustang geldings in the adjacent pasture, were also riveted on the activity. After Lucky was gone, Feldspar met Lucky's herd at the fence line and seemed to be communicating in some quiet way. I knew there were people I should be calling about this devastating event and that I should be sharing it with our community on Facebook. It usually helps me to write or talk about difficult times, but I just could not. Every time I thought about it, I felt a tight lump form in my throat. Sharing would have to wait. Meanwhile, I've noticed changes in his herd, mainly for his best life friend, Red. Red was in his stall eating when Lucky passed. I don't know if he now has an association with that, but he's gone from not being in a hurry to go out after eating to rushing outside and dashing around as if he's looking for something. The first 2 nights after eating, he went to the furthest point in the back of their large double paddock. He stood stock still under a tree looking into the sunset. I can't explain these things. Since Lucky's body was in the paddock adjacent to Red's all night, I thought Red would have seen him and had some closure, but I'm not sure that that happened. At the risk of sounding a little out there, it seems to me that Red believes Lucky somehow vanished when he was in his stall eating. And if he looks hard enough, he'll find him. Whatever the case may be, it is heartbreaking to watch. Red's now also sometimes reluctant to come in to eat, and he'd never been before. He was always at the gate, impatiently waiting to get to his food. Lucky was the boss of his herd. He would defer to Red, but Red had no interest in being the boss. Now that Lucky is gone, there is a decided void in leadership in a group that has been together, in some cases, for decades. It will take some time for that to sort out. The days have gone by. I still couldn't bring myself to share, except to return a text to a great friend and board member who's been with us for 16 years. All I could write was that I was in a bad way, as Lucky had been put down after the most brutal passing I had ever witnessed. Finally, Saturday morning, I got up early and went straight to the computer to tell the story to our Facebook friends. Partway through, my hands began to shake at the keyboard, and I had to stop. But I'd been absent for 3 days, and I had to make some kind of statement. I didn't want to be cryptic or dramatic, but I had to do it in a way that wouldn't send me back into my spiral of grief. On Sunday, I finally called my longtime friend, Susan. She was overwhelmed thinking of the pain poor Lucky had been in and how difficult it must have been and still was to me. She'd been incredibly worried, as she'd always known me to be able to share these difficult situations. I cannot explain why this is affecting me so differently. Later that day, it occurred to me that this was way too much to share with the written word. I'd long wanted to start a podcast and decided this was the story that would compel me to do that. Perhaps that is the silver lining in all of the sadness. It will open up a new line of communication with our friends and followers. Maybe Lucky's legacy, even though he was not a spirit horse rescue equine, is to help spread the word about these magnificent creatures and how much their presence in our lives can mean. I believe he would like to think that he, Lucky's shooting star, would lead to more people finding out about the important mission we are fulfilling, and that he could somehow be the catalyst for us to be able to save more lives and offer better ways to get along with our equine brothers and sisters. Yes, he'd like that. Perhaps it was because I needed the time and space to figure out what Lucky's legacy should be. I don't know how this podcast will evolve, but would appreciate it if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel. I will post on our Facebook page when a new episode has been released. If you have any ideas that you'd like to see addressed in a future podcast, I'd appreciate hearing from you. You can message me through our Spirit Horse Facebook page or email me at spirithorseddd@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. Hope to hear from you in the future. Yours naturally,